Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. Undeserved. I didn't prepare this event. It's an event prepared by John O'Brien, who unfortunately is sick, so he couldn't be here. My name is Hanna Czerwinkova. I'm a professor of anthropology here at Maynooth, and we work with John closely within the Center for East European and Eurasian Studies here at Maynooth. John is in sociology, I'm in anthropology, and we have other colleagues from across the departments at Maynooth collaborating on different events. Before we start, I'd like to ask Colin Buttrell to tell us about the series within which this event is taking part.
Okay, thanks very much, Hannah, and thanks very much. It's great to see so many people here this week into the semester. Just a brief word about the context. This is billed as the Emre Işık Memorial Lecture. We do this every year. Emre was friend and colleague, very dear friend and colleague of many of us in the department who worked here in the early 2000s, went back to Istanbul to work in Maynooth Centre University back in 2004. Emre was a force of nature, intellectually, certainly I think the most formidable person that I've ever met in 30 years as an academic, but also a very formidably sociable person as well, generous and kind. And he is dearly, dearly missed. We lost Emre back in 2016, and since 2018 we've been doing an annual lecture. This is the sixth in the series. John thought it would be a good idea, because it is a very good idea to have Dimitar here, because of the obvious connection with Turkey. But I was thinking today about Emre's time in Maynooth, and the last thing that Emre did as an academic in Maynooth was to organise a conference in the John Hume building, which just opened at the time. And the title of the conference was, if I remember rightly, Turkey, a Bridge or a Breach to the EU. That's 20 years ago. And there was a rake of Turkish academics came over, mainly political scientists. And what was interesting at that time, going back 20 years, was how quietly, not confident, but optimistic people were about the possibility of Turkey's accession to the European Union. In fact, many of the political scientists who came along almost appeared as ambassadors or emissaries for the Turkish case for admission. And Emre didn't share their optimism. Emre's kind of disposition towards the world was a wee bit more jaundiced, a wee bit more critical. And he felt that that discursive project of Europeanness, as elastic as it can be, and we found out in the last 14 months that it can be very elastic indeed, he didn't think it would ever be elastic enough to include his home country of Turkey. Unfortunately, almost 20 years down the line, I think Emre has been rather closer to, rather more prescient in his views than perhaps some of his colleagues. So it strikes me as a perfectly fitting theme for us for the Emre Işık Memorial Lecture. I just want to thank Dimitar for coming. Pleasure to host him. I want to also thank Hannah, because as some people know, our colleague and friend John O'Brien has been laid low by COVID and unfortunately can't share this evening's event, but I'm sure Hannah will be a more than adequate replacement. So thanks very much to Hannah, thanks very much to everybody for joining us to do many things, but not least to mark the memory of our good friend Emre Işık. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Let's start just a couple of announcements. Actually, one important announcement. We are joined by students from my third year, final year class in anthropology, and the class ends before 6. So if they leave, it's not out of disrespect, but if they have to leave, they have to catch a bus and stuff, which they normally do before this session. The event is going to take, our speaker is going to speak for about 40 minutes. So not very long, to leave space for discussion. So we are very much counting on you to help us in the second part of the event. Before I give a word to our distinguished speaker, I would like to introduce him. So Dr. Dimitar Bechev is a distinguished visiting scholar at Carnegie Europe, a lecturer at Oxford School of Global and Area Studies at the University of Oxford, and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He has authored many books, and many books that are read and are influential, including Turkey under Erdogan with Yale University Press last year, Historical Dictionary of North Macedonia, Rival Power Russia in Southeastern Europe in 2017, and he also co-edited Russia Rising, Putin's Foreign Policy in the Middle East and North Africa, published in 2021. He focuses mostly, in his work, focuses mostly on the politics of East and Central Europe, the Balkans and Turkey, and Russian foreign policy He has published in places that many of us just dream of, publishing in influential media, including Political, EU Observer, Financial Times, The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, and many others. He holds a PhD in international relations from the University of Oxford, was a lecturer at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, served as senior policy fellow and head of the Sophia Center at the European Council of Foreign Relations from 2010 to 2014. Until 2014, he held fellowships at the Human Science Institute, Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna, Harvard Center for European Studies, the European Institute at the London School of Economics, and many others. And we are incredibly privileged and happy that you are here with us today. And before I give the word to you, I want to welcome Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Bulgaria. Thank you so much for joining us. The word is yours.
Well, thank you so much. It's a really generous introduction, and I feel challenged now to meet the expectations. But before I get into Turkey, just a word of thanks to John, who brought me here. I feel sort of bad because this is the second time I'm coming to Ireland, and he falls ill down with COVID. So I hope that correlation is not causation, as many social scientists have been saying over generations. But I really hope that next time around, John will be with us, because he's been a real inspiration, including his work on small peripheral nations in the EU, including my native country, Bulgaria. So, John, we are all thankful to you. And the timing of this talk, which of course I want to make as interactive as possible, could not be more appropriate. Turkey is heading towards a landmark election on the 14th of May. I won't be talking that much about the election, but I suspect that in the question and answers, we'll get a bit deeper into what it is taken, what scenarios we might be looking forward to. But suffice to say that now there's a real chance of President Erdogan losing power, which is somewhat ironic because my book ends on a note that whatever happens, it will be Erdogan's Turkey for decades to come. Now the opposition has gotten their act together. They are mounting a serious challenge to Erdogan's power, and the outcome of the election is not very certain. It can go either way, and Turkey might be in for some turbulence in the next weeks and months. So I encourage those of you who are interested in this part of the world to keep a close eye on what happens. There'll be some interesting parallels to January 6th in the US, or to what happened following Bolsonaro's downfall in Brazil. So that's one thing that makes the discussion very topical. The other thing, I suppose, is what everyone in our line of business, but more broadly, has been following very keenly over the past year and a half, or a couple of months, the war in Ukraine. Turkey is not really an outsider. It's one of the key countries in this situation, for better or worse. And it's been instrumental in the grain export deal from Ukrainian ports. And it's been trying to play the role of a mediator. So I'll spend some time at the end, maybe offering some ideas and thoughts about what Turkey is up to. And by Turkey, very often, we don't mean the country, because this guy here has basically hijacked Turkish foreign policy, amongst other things. So it's down to what Erdogan wants to do in vis-a-vis Russia and vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine. So those two things together put always a spotlight on Turkey. But frankly, if you go back decades, they go all those big themes in the politics of Europe and the Middle East and Eurasia as well. There's always a Turkish dimension. It's hard to exaggerate the role this country plays in regional affairs. But it's not my task, of course. You've come here to talk and to engage on the issue of EU. So I want to look at several aspects of the EU-Turkey relationship historically, but also more towards the present. And I want to explore 5 separate questions. First of all, how this EU-Turkey relationship developed over the decades. So I'll borrow with some history. Secondly, to think about what went wrong, going back to what Colin said about the early optimism and what your dear departed colleague sort of sought to qualify back in the day. So why is it that this whole success story derailed at some point about 15, 14 years ago? Thirdly, look at how bad did it get eventually as Erdogan turned increasing authoritarian. Next, a snapshot of where we are right now. And finally, some crystal ball gazing, speculate what the future might hold for this key relationship. Because, I mean, geographically, objectively, Turkey is a large neighbor, and there is no drawbridge option one way or another, EU, but also its member states who will be doing business with Turkey, whoever happens to be in charge in Ankara. So this is my game plan now. The EU dimension is somewhat out of fashion these days. In the good days, everyone in academia, in policy making, was publishing articles, papers about EU, how Turkey is Europeanizing or not, what are the obstacles, what membership is about. That's no longer the case. But I feel that sometimes we as analysts are throwing the baby with the bathwater, forgetting that still this is a key relationship. I mean, you just look at trade figures, and I'll have something to say there, all the economic linkages and political linkages between Turkey and the rest of Europe, and you see how close the ties are to this day, really. So Europe is still relevant, even if Turkey sees itself as a key sort of power in the Middle Eastern context. It's also involved in the Caucasus and several other regions, including Sub-Saharan Africa. There are lots of gravity forces that still make it part of the European context beyond the EU as well. So how did it start? Well, the story starts in the very early days of European integration. So Turkey was one of the first countries to sign association agreement in 1963, that's the Treaty of Ankara. I mean, it's basically the same point that Greece, of course, now a long-standing member state, started pursuing a closer political and economic relationship with the European community. But also Turkey was on the same track from very early on. The association agreement contained all the standard clauses about trade liberalization, about gradual abolition of agricultural quotas, but also it foresaw a much more advanced relationship in the sense that Turkey and the then European community committed to build a customs union together. That was a time just to inject a bit of more kind of social context where the great migration of Turks happened to core Western European countries, especially Germany, in need of industrial labor. And those of you who are interested in sociology, this is where this composite identity of German Turks comes about. And we have plenty of examples of people who have shaped German culture, society to this day, including, for instance, politicians. They're members of parliament, of government, same in Netherlands, and so on and so forth. So that's pretty much the moment in the 1960s where Turkey sought to pursue a close relationship with the European community and move forward one step at a time. Turkey, of course, was a member of NATO since the 1950s, and Turkey also joined the Council of Europe, and is still there. By the way, the European Court of Human Rights has jurisdiction over Turkey. So if you compare Turkey and Russia, a comparison often made, Russia has withdrawn from the council, but Turkey is still there, even if many of those judgments are not enforced or challenged by the authorities. But we see the same story of institutional entanglement that went on and on. Why didn't it progress for those first 2-3 decades? Well, obviously, Turkish politics was very volatile in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. Turkey went through 3 military coups. Turkish economy was very much state-dominated. That's something I discuss in the book, because it's a book that starts really not with Erdogan's arrival to power. It starts in the 1980s. So the Turkish state-driven economy became much more open and underwent major liberalization in the 1980s after the last big coup that eventually led to somebody called Turgut Özal seizing power. And I'm sure some of you would be familiar with this era, but not as much. But to understand the Turkey of today, you have to think about what happened 40 years ago in many respects, because the echoes are still very much there. Basically, politicians as Özal, who in many ways is Erdogan's predecessor, who sought to first of all integrate Turkey much more with the global marketplace, which went also through basically building closer ties with European community. Also, they sought democratic legitimacy by trying to assemble coalitions of voters in domestic politics, both seculars, but also pious, conservative Muslims, and also who tried to carve out some independence from the sort of the tutors of the state, the guardians, the military and the secularist bureaucracy. So this formula of politics merging together pro-market economics, conservatism, openness to the West, openness to the EU or the EC at the time, but also opening or market opening to neighbors in the Middle East and eventually in the post-communist world, is what Erdogan took over in due course later in his career. But I'm diverting. Basically, the next milestone why I mentioned Özal is that he was the person who actually applied for EU membership on behalf of Turkey in 1987. So he was one who thought time has come that Turkey has reformed its economy to the extent that it can cope with competitive pressure of the EU integration and could benefit from closer integration. Interestingly, that was the same time that Morocco applied as well. And the Moroccans were told, no, you're not a European country, which is somewhat ironic because you actually have EU territory in Morocco. You have the Spanish enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla, technically speaking, EU territory. So Turkey was not told anything. So the issue was left hanging in the air because obviously there was a realization on the European community part that, I mean, Turkey was a difficult one to swallow because of its size, the questions around its democratic system, the cultural prejudice, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, you could not just close the door to Turkey because of the stakes involved geopolitically, but also economic mutual benefits. So that's a theme that continues, I would argue, to this day. So we've been going in circles since basically the late 80s. So that's number two. Number three is that Turkey actually had the opportunity, even before starting membership negotiations, to conclude the customs union, right? I mean, that's a regional commitment. And without getting too much into the weeds, being part of a customs union is a big deal. It's a reward in itself, because essentially it means that you're a foreign investor. You're a German car making company like Volkswagen. After 96, when this arrangement came into place, it meant that you could set up a production facility in, say, Western Turkey, in the city of Bursa, which is a huge manufacturing center. You can assemble your cars, source components from anywhere, and then re-export it back to the EU market. So it was a win-win, and the customs union gave a huge boost to the Turkish economy and drove Europeanization in the economic sphere. I mean, Turkish business evolved in the 1980s, but especially in the 1990s and onwards. So even without a formal political process, you could see, and society in Turkey could see all the benefits of Europeanization. Of course, there was a great deal of frustration because there was a moment when EU opened its doors to Central and Eastern Europe, and Turkey saw itself sort of sidelined at the time. The likes of Poland, the Czech Republic, Hungary got green light in '97 to start negotiations. Turkey was left on the back burner. But even that changed, because by the end of the decade, the EU came up with a new stunt, if you will, sort of saying that you're a candidate country, you have candidate status. So this is a reward in itself. That's what now is being done to Ukraine and to Moldova. And it's a symbolic concession, counts as a next step. And that was something that EU offered to Turkey at the landmark Helsinki summit. Also, Turkey started implementing reforms, changing its constitution to meet the EU conditionality. And another benefit of this Europeanization was the amazing rapprochement between Greece and Turkey around that time in 1999. Now, the earthquake that devastated Turkey brought back memories of this hopeful moment that Greeks and Turks could actually work together and overcome some of the tensions. So I know I get very much into detail, but my point is that by the time Erdogan came into power, there was a positive process underway, and lots of different stakeholders in Turkey were invested into it. You had liberals who liked EU because it was a way to democratize Turkey. You have businesses who liked the EU because it opened opportunities for investment and trade. You had the leftist nationalist Kurds who were similarly interested in the EU because the EU was an external check on the Turkish state, and was this pressure on Turkey to open to minority rights and recognize Kurdish identity. And finally, conservative Turks also saw the EU as an ally in challenging the sort of authoritarian state at the time. So this coalition was very powerful, and it shaped Turkey's domestic politics in those days, which is ancient history. Now the EU cannot shape domestic politics, but that was how it was not that long ago. And that's what Erdogan saw as an opportunity. And I remember the first time, just on a personal note, when I listened to him speak in 2004, he said all the right things. I mean, he was like a great reformer, willing to go an extra mile, implementing EU's conditions, only to get Turkey into the EU, but also to start even the negotiation process. And that was very much the high mark, the early era of the AKP, which again, many people are saying they didn't want Europe because they believed in it. They needed just cynically an external ally, not just the EU, but also the US. I think it's more complicated than that. But the alliance was very much the central force in Turkish politics, and the lines were drawn. On the one hand, you had all those people who were associated with the state who believe that Turkey should be Western, but not in the EU way, because the way was to contain conservative forces. And then you had other people rallying behind Erdogan saying that Turkey has to democratize and has to allow for pluralism for all those suppressed identities, and the EU is there to help. Now, this is very much the story of the golden era, and I understand that I've been fast forwarding to lots of detail and nuance. But the key question is, why did that unravel? Something I deal in the book, and it's a very polarizing question in Turkey. There will be many people who will say that the West is to blame, and also pro-Western liberals, because they were taken for a ride. Erdogan hijacked the system, and he duped everyone, including myself, probably at the time, because and many of my friends. Now, there is also a school of thought that EU shares part of the blame, because it gave Turkey false hope by opening negotiations in 2005, only to basically let it down, and it didn't go anywhere. And there's probably a school of thought, which is, I guess, where my book lies, that it's a mixture of the two. So Turkey turned authoritarian starting from around 2007, 2008. It was a slow drip. Maybe the key reason was that there was the rule of the game: to survive, you had to grab power. That's something that Erdogan basically concluded, having faced strong opposition from the incumbent elites, also a closure case against his party. Also, he was in power for such a long time. After 10 years, it was difficult to let it go, and there was no life in opposition, which is, of course, something that he now has to grapple with. Whatever his thinking was, objectively, Turkey moved more and more into this majoritarian populist direction. And the key point of departure was in 2013, the Gezi Park protests, when many of the former supporters of AKP basically went on the street and challenged the government. Some sections of the party, including then President Abdullah Gül, were willing to engage in dialogue over an issue to do with urban development, not about toppling the government. But the response from the state, that is, Erdogan, was so harsh, and he suppressed and he switched off. And the repression went on and on, all the way to the recent trials of key figures in civil society who were sent to prison on trumped up charges, including people I've known and worked with and published with. So that was a point of departure, where actually this whole idea that Erdogan might be a flawed Democrat and he's one step forward, two step back, or two step forward, one step back, it didn't hold after 2013. So Turkey went authoritarian, but also there is blame on the EU side too, let's be frank about it. The EU had no position on how to deal with Turkey, and it doesn't have a position to this day. To me, the critical threshold was the election of Nicolas Sarkozy in France. Of course, Cyprus had blocked Turkey negotiations chapters, but the moment you have a French president saying that the negotiations that Turkey is conducting should not lead to membership, but to something else, to a privileged partnership. And by the way, there are some chapters in the negotiation. I don't want to get too technical here, and I'm happy to discuss it. But there are chapters that are off limits because the exercise is not about membership, it's about something else. It was clear there was a commitment problem on the EU side as well. And we entered a situation in EU-Turkey relations where both sides were pretending they were in negotiations. So Turkey could not walk away for obvious reasons. But also the EU could not cancel negotiations because there is no majority either way in the EU Council for every country that wants to terminate this charade. By now, there's another country that wants to keep the door open to Turkey. And then result is this virtual negotiation. That's been the case ever since. Now, moving to my next point. Let's see how much time I have, because I might be getting closer to my cutoff point. So moving to the next stage, how bad did it get? Well, first of all, the relationship deteriorated to a transactional sort of bargaining situation. You could see it very clearly in 2016 with the refugee deal that you basically agreed by a common declaration. So the legal status of this commitment is a matter of questioning in Brussels. Well, essentially, then Prime Minister Ahmed Davutoglu, who is now in the opposition coalition, agreed with the EU that Turkey will be containing refugees from Syria on its soil in exchange of, first of all, getting financial assistance. And fair enough, because Turkey has been taking care of millions, close to 4 million Syrians right now, but also will be receiving people repatriated from the Greek islands back to Turkey. And the EU committed that there will be a legal route for Syrians to claim asylum in Turkey and their asylum applications to be assessed. But the big heading there is an ad hoc commitment that is up to renewal every couple of years. And it was renewed again in 2021 for another 3 billion euro. And it will be up for renewal in 2024. And this encapsulates the sort of ad hoc piecemeal type of relationship. You don't have negotiations based on a common set of principles and a shared goal that Turkey eventually will join the EU, will converge, will reform its institutions. You have, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Also, Erdogan used the refugee fears and the rise of populist parties to try to blackmail the EU, with limited success, of course. In the case of Greece in early 2020, the Turkish state tried to ship Afghan refugees and some Syrians to the land border with Greece, and they, of course, EU in Greece, but also Frontex strengthened the border. They pushed back people, so there was nobody innocent on both sides. But I don't think everyone got what he wanted from the EU. It also went as bad as they were member states starting to argue that Turkey is not really a difficult partner, but really an adversary, similar to Russia. So it would be in the same box. Not only because Turkey was willing to use military power in relations with neighbors in the Middle East. I mean, you had several operations in Syria, you had the operation in Libya, but also Erdogan was flexing his military muscle in the Eastern Mediterranean vis-a-vis Cyprus and indirectly Greece. And then you have President Macron of France arguing that, you know what, NATO is brain dead. That was in 2019. For those of you who remember, Turkey is a challenge. You have to actually contain Turkey. You have to help Greece build its military strength in order to dissuade Ankara from using the threat of military force or coercive diplomacy. So think about it, you know, from a situation where you're actually negotiating, you get into low-key conflict where military force is put into the mix. So it's really depressing where we got. More conceptually, at a conceptual level, it's clear that Turkey also, the thinking in Turkey evolved, and not just on behalf of the religious conservatives, but also broader segment of the political elite, including on the secular side. And that's also the case to this day. So the conclusion was that Turkey is not an eternal candidate knocking on the door of the EU. But it's an independent power that has its interests and can build its own networks of influence across neighboring regions, be it in the Caucasus, in Syria, in the Middle East, in the Balkans as well, that is in countries that also aspiring to join the EU. So Turkey is an equal. It has to be respected, and it can also talk to major European powers, but it's not just yet another country willing to do everything to please the Europeans, only to be denied. So this thinking is very much critical to Turkey. So that is important. Now, maybe that was the low point. I think now I'll argue there are some openings. So I think we've passed the worst. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that it will be all optimistic from now on. But just to point at the silver lining. I mean, first of all, the tone in Ankara has changed vis-a-vis all neighbors. Turkey was isolated 2-3 years ago. Now you have a series of resets. Israel, with Egypt lately, even with Syria, with the Assad regime, however difficult that is for Erdogan. There are peace talks with Armenia as well, normalization. And there is an attempt to reset ties with Greece as well. So that's the tone, the rhetoric is much less abrasive in Turkey. That's a function also of economic weakness. So this confidence of the regime that Turkey is rising power and it's doing everything and it's who cares about Europe? We don't need them anymore. That's a thing of relegated to the past as well. So there's a bit more realism, not maybe that much, but at least compared to 4 years ago, a bit more than that. Society, if you look at public opinion surveys, also lead to a similar conclusion. So, for instance, there's a survey the German Marshall Fund, which is a think tank, conducted in Turkey, and they have a chapter in Ankara as well. So, about 47% into 2022 in Turkey trust the EU, which is an amazing figure given the mentality in Turkey that you don't like foreigners. You don't like Americans, definitely. You don't like Israelis. You don't like Russians. You trust only another Turk. That's the saying everyone in Turkey knows. But now we have 47% seeing the EU as a trustworthy partner, and the percentage goes up to 60 when you look at the cohort between 18 and 25. You have 33% saying that the EU is the preferable partner for Turkey in foreign affairs. It's 44% for the young crowds. And 58% is in favor of membership. Of course, they know it's not achievable, but they do believe it's a good thing. So society doesn't necessarily look at the EU as a problem, but more as an opportunity. Also, on a more policy basis, Turkey has signaled willingness to align with EU policies. For instance, one big demand of Turkey these days, and for years really, is to update the customs union to include services and public procurement in order to upgrade the relationship. Erdogan made the turn on the green agenda, right? And by green, I don't mean Islamist, I mean environmentalist. Turkey joined the Paris Climate Accords. The looming date is 2026, when the cross-border adjustment mechanism, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, will be coming into effect. So Turkey has to align with some parts of the EU legislation on climate in order to continue to trade seamlessly with the EU. And I would argue Turkey is still basically aligned with the EU on energy security issues, being a major country for gas transit from the Caspian Sea to parts of the EU. Turkey, on the security side, is a problem now because of cooperation with Russia and because of vetoing Finland until recently, but also still Sweden. But in the Western Balkans, Turkey accepted new members without any preconditions. North Macedonia was welcomed and Montenegro was welcomed. So it's not that Turkey has always played the game that Russia plays in regions, and Turkey is still in favor of Ukraine and Georgia. And that's the official position of joining NATO. You might argue that's not realistic, but that's been the Turkish policy through and through. So basically, there's some green shoots for what it's worth. Now, what comes next? I mean, if you gaze at the crystal ball, I think the election will define many things. If the opposition comes to power, there will be more goodwill on behalf of the EU, but also on behalf of the opposition. For instance, there will be probably implementing a decision by the European Court of Human Rights to free the jailed leader of the pro-Kurdish People's Democracy Party, Selahattin Demirtas, who ended up in prison on Trump charges. So if Demirtas is free, then other people like Osman Kavala are free, then EU will have much greater leeway to engage in technical negotiations of updating the customs union. The outcome of the war also matters. If the war continues, I think Western governments will probably try to accommodate Turkey as much as possible, because despite the Putin-Erdogan dynamic, still Turkey needs to be kept on side. And Turkey will probably be profiting from the war. If you look at trade, exports to Russia went up by 100% last year, as Turkey served as a back door. So that's another variable that probably is important to consider. But I think, and that's the last thing I'm going to say before I pass it over to your question. I think with Turkey and the EU, a colleague of mine once compared it, and maybe it's probably the wrong place to use this phrase, but they compared it to a Catholic marriage. So there is no divorce in this relationship. I mean, there might be a divorce between US and Turkey, but with the EU, it's not in the cards. EU is the main export market. EU is the main source of FDI. The politics are not in line, but there is the functional demand at the society level and at the economy level to do more and to cooperate. So in a Europe that is probably not as much centered on the EU, but EU exploring other means of association, there will be scope for more small step integration, which is a bit underwhelming as a conclusion, but I think that's probably the realistic thing to say at this point. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If anybody needs to leave, we are starting the discussion. You don't have to leave, but I know that some students needed to catch a bus. Feel free, don't feel stressed. Just go. Thank you so much. That's fascinating. Very clear and illuminating. Can you say who you are?
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a PhD student from Dublin City University, School of Communications. I have my thesis is mostly doing with like regime change and focusing on democratic backsliding and so on. I have a question when it comes to Turkey. I'm not focusing on Turkey in my thesis, but this is just a curiosity of mine to pick your brain. What do you think happens if Erdogan loses? Would he end up in jail? Does his party even lose parliamentary majority? Because there's a chance that he might lose presidency, but there's a chance that his party still keeps parliamentary majority either way. So he could make the country ungovernable, even within the parliament, even if the presidency is lost. But the jail option is probably more for countries that have EU prospects and then end up criminalizing everything that was happening, all these shades of gray that were happening in the background while these types of governments were in power. So I don't know, or do you think there's a whole other scenario that was unseen before, because usual scenarios are jail, make country ungovernable from the opposition. And I don't know what's the third one.
No, these are very important questions, and I think lots of people are scratching their head right now. For my 5 penny words, I think he won't be going to jail. Partly because the judiciary is dominated by loyalists who might take some time before they decide which way the wind blows. Partly because the new government will be smart enough not to take such a risk. And indeed, I think there'll be people trying to be mediators, trying to reassure him, because in this coalition, you have former associates of Erdogan, Davutoglu and people like Ali Babacan. They'll be the go-betweens trying to say, you'll be fine, just step down and give us a chance. But it's not only about Erdogan, it's also about the whole network, family and business associates around him. I don't think he can guarantee their well-being if he's in opposition. So he doesn't represent himself only, but it's a whole structure, ecosystem, if you will. And think about the big construction companies profit it has, including those who now have been exposed as in the earthquake. So how about those people? So it's a difficult one to crack. I think rationally, if he loses in a quote unquote normal country, you actually have an incentive to be in opposition for a time, because realistically, it will be a disparate coalition that is united only by the token of being anti-Erdogan. Soon they'll be discovering the cracks and the fissures that divide them, say on the Kurdish issue. And Turkey has lots of economic problems. It will be a mess. In a couple of months, maybe a year, there will be nostalgia for the good old days under Erdogan, and lo and behold, he might be coming back. But it's in a normal situation. If you rotate and probably assumes a certain level of rule of law, that you can be certain that you'll be fine in opposition. And we don't know that. There is a real danger of a contested election where both sides mobilize. You have on the opposition a Gezi Park type of so you have a Gezi Park situation, mass demonstrations in Istanbul, in Ankara, in Izmir, and then Erdogan calls his own supporters to protect the victory. So that's Brazil, the Bolsonaro or Trump on a big scale, and eventually security forces, police side with Erdogan. You have a crackdown and God knows what happens. Maybe nothing. No, that you have the escalation, but it will return in some years. So that's unfortunately a very viable scenario. And the real reason, I mean, there are many reasons, but one institutional reason is the transition to the presidential system, right? In the presidential elections, it's a zero-sum contest. You either lose the presidency or you win. And the president is the all-powerful figure. In the parliamentary system, and it's not for nothing that the opposition is calling to transition back into the parliamentary system. I mean, everybody gets something. And you can think about coalitions. The AKP lost their majority in 2015, in June 2015. In 2018, they sort of have a majority, but they have a coalition. So it's a more kind of balanced scenario of give and take. And that's one of the virtues of parliamentary democracy. But yeah, unfortunately, Turkey is a presidential republic, and you cannot have two presidents. There has to be one winner. And without an institutional mechanism to resolve this conflict, is probably, unless somebody wins the runoff, and I think there will be a runoff, unless somebody wins the runoff by a very healthy margin, there will be allegations on both sides of a stolen election, and it will be very turbulent.
Hey, my name is Keith Harrington. I'm a lecturer at Dublin City University. I had a bit of a left-centre question. I was wondering, right now in Ankara, what are the attitudes towards Gagauzia in southern Moldova. I mean, is it even on the map? And how might they change if Erdogan is, voted out of power?
Well, I don't think it will make any difference because Turkish policy is pretty standard. I mean, they're Turkic. I mean, they're Christians, so they're not proper Turkish because you have to be also Sunni Muslim to be proper Turkish. But still, they're our ethnic brethren, so we engage with them. But the stakes for Turkey are not very high because this community is not really under Turkish influence. If anybody is important, it's Russia. They're heavily pro-Russian. And also, if Erdogan wins, the Nationalist Action Party, which is heavily Turkish ethnic in the ideology, will be part of the coalition. If the opposition wins, the good party, the E party, which is a splinter of the MHP, will be in power. So either way, you have an important constituent in the government calling for strong ties to other Turkic communities and countries. So I don't think it changes anything on the Gagos. And it's not a very salient issue, I think. Surprisingly, and it's a very different to look in a very different direction. Before this election, certainly before the earthquake, many people expected there will be this Punch and Judy show between Greece and Turkey. Because Greece is also going towards an election, probably 2 elections. The Greeks will be using Turkey as a bogeyman. And also Erdogan will be sort of using the scare tactics vis-a-vis Greece. And he made the statement, we can land in Athens tomorrow if you want. And refreshingly, nobody's bad-mouthing the other. So Greece is absent. So foreign policy is not that much part of the picture. Other issues are at the center.
Thanks so much. Sorry, you go first.
Thank you very much for the impressive presentation. I'm also a PhD student candidate in University School of Law and Government. And my research is on the EU immigration law, especially from Turkey and the EU-Turkey statement. And I'm just wondering, how do you see the changing role of European institutions in relationship between Turkey and Turkey? Because we saw how they were legitimizing the deal with Turkey for Syrians, and especially European Council, European Court of Human Rights, and European Court of Justice. They legitimized what they did with this again for the human rights abuses of Syrians. And if they were just easily tolerate Erdogan's blackmailing when he was using the Syrians as a political weapon. How do you see these policy EU institutions changes? And also, I'm wondering, how do you perceive if Erdogan lost the election next month? I hope so. And because the opposition party, they are using the Syrian refugee deal to remove as part of their election promises. How do you see these dimensions as part of the election?
Well, these are difficult questions to crack, I admit. I agree with you that I mean, that was an intergovernmental deal, but everyone in the EU went along, definitely because political interest was at stake. But to play the devil's advocate, what was the alternative of the deal? I'm not sure. I don't have an answer for myself. You have all those people in Turkey. They're stuck there. They've built life there. Turkey doesn't give them refugee status because it has this geographical exception. So they're in a legal limbo. Now, everybody in Turkey, and it's probably the dark side of Europeanization, Turkey has become xenophobic. And everybody outbids the other, how tough they're on refugees, who will be sending more people to Syria. The opposition says we will send all 4 million of them. Erdogan says we'll build new homes in occupied parts of Syria. And I don't know how you sustain this situation. I think ultimately the EU wants them to be there and it wants to pay for that. And I think to their credits, I'm thinking aloud here, to their credits, they didn't accept the Turkish state demand, which is give us the money, don't ask questions how we spend it, right? You give us the lump sum, and then we can spend the money in Syria, we can spend the money in Turkey, but it's our business. Whereas the EU bureaucracy sort of said, you know, this is a disbursement, so our rules apply. We have to spend it in tranches. We spend it through bureaucratic means, and there's some accountability back. So this is at least putting some order in the chaos and in this whole political arrangement. And the other thing is that I think those arrangements develop a life of their own. It was an ad hoc measure in 2015, 2016 because of the surge of migration. Now in 2021, you saw it renewed, and I'm pretty sure it will be renewed in 2024. And in the meantime, I think eventually more Syrians will stay in Turkey. They'll assimilate into the mainstream despite the xenophobic reaction. In fact, you have lots of people in Turkey who are of Arab origin, including Erdogan's spouse, just to be a bit more gossipy, who is of Arab background. And it's one of the strengths of Turkey, being a country. I mean, there's this kind of very monolithic idea of what Turkish national identity is about. But you scratch the surface and you see lots of different ethnic groups that made up the nation. And I think Syrians will be yet another pillar of Turkish society. Sorry, what was your second question?
How do you see the relationship with Erdogan with the election, especially for the removal of the Turkish statement?
Yeah, I think everybody will stick with it. I think what would happen is the opposition, if they come to power, they'll try to up the ante, because remember, Davutoglu's original idea was that this would be a stepping stone towards liberalization. They'll say, you know what, let's make it serious. We won't go at the end of the end of the process where Turkey actually gets the visas removed. And then the EU demands some other reforms. We have to change the anti-terror law. We have a shopping list. I mean, if we get into this conversation of conditionality, that would be, I think, a healthy thing for both parties. It would be great if EU has the courage to liberalize visas with Turkey. It probably won't be easy given the political atmosphere in Europe. But if we get there, it will mean re-institutionalization of the relationship beyond the give and take, the transactionalism.
Thank you. Great.
Okay, my name is Alex Chuprina. I'm a PhD student with the Department of Sociology University. So thank you very much for your interesting presentation. My question is regarding geopolitics. So in case the opposition wins, hopefully, yeah. So what would be any changes in relationships between Turkey and Azerbaijan, especially in their relationships with Armenia? That's one question. And another related, would Turkey ever, even if liberals in power for a long time, recognize the genocide as such of Armenia?
Well, the first question is easier to answer. There will be no change. It will be the same support for Azerbaijan. And also, what is interesting about this bigger brother, younger brother, is that very often the younger brother has the upper hand. For instance, Azerbaijan managed to derail the rapprochement with Armenia in 2009, 2010, when Turkey was trying to normalize relations, and then Aliyev managed to pull some strings in Turkish domestic politics and to impose his line. But it's the same as Gagauzia. If the opposition wins, the EE party will be part of the setup, and they'll drive pretty much the same policy as the MHP. sorry, the second question with the Armenian genocide, I don't think anybody will recognize it, but hopefully as genocide. I mean, they use other terms, but hopefully we'll come back to the situation we had in the 2000s. And so credit where credit is due. The early Erdogan era made it possible to debate it publicly and also to mark the 24th of April and to commemorate the victims rather than trying to clamp down on it and close discussion. So that's not too much to us because we've seen it. It doesn't undermine Turkey in any way. Of course, it took some personal toll. I mean, many of you, or some of you might be familiar with the assassination of Hrant Dink, who was this Armenian journalist, prominent intellectual who was murdered in downtown Istanbul. So some people have paid a heavy price for it. But there was in the public sphere this opening, and it became possible to talk about it and to revisit this traumatic memory. Now this has gone the other way, but I think in some ways the genie is out of the bottle. So it's not that dangerous, and the opposition will be accommodating, more open. It won't be a liberal government. I mean, the opposition is a conglomerate of all kinds of people. You have liberals, you have center-right people, you have hardcore nationalists, you have Islamists as well, you have Kurds. So yeah, it won't be a liberal government in the classical definition, but maybe it will be a bit more relaxed about those things, and we go back to where we were.
And
online questions that
that'd be great.
that's okay. And one here from Paul sorry, Turkey has been on the waiting list for decades. There is clearly no will to admit her. Surely this should now be made explicit. And then another one from him saying, does the experience of the EU show that it's a good idea to admit members purely on the basis of restoration of their democracy?
No. I don't think anybody will say it openly. I mean, there will be people have been saying it openly, individual politicians, but I don't see the EU doing it because, I mean, again, there has to be a decision in the council, and some countries probably will be happy to say so. I mean, I don't think any French leader will have any calls to say that Turkey doesn't belong to the EU. But there'll be others saying, you know what, do we want to be the ones to destroy the relationship? Do we want to be the one to pull the plug? If somebody wants to walk out from the negotiations, let it be Erdogan, not us. So it's on him, not on us. And there'll be other people saying that if you slam the door, this actually empowers Erdogan to say nobody wants us, the world is against us. So I don't think this decision will emerge. And I mean, that's probably the greatest disadvantage, but also sometimes the advantage of the EU. They cannot decide on anything. I mean, when they were deciding on, it's always the lowest common denominator. When they were deciding on sanctioning Turkey, it was a very difficult conversation. That was over Cyprus. And ultimately, they imposed sanctions on some second-tier figures in the state oil company. So this is small fry. So people are saying it's EU is weak. They cannot sanction people. But equally, when you have to take this fundamental decision, which might be actually backfiring at you, there's some backstops in the EU as well. So to be cynical about it, we'll be going into circle with Erdogan saying, "Okay, tell us that you don't want us," and he's been saying it in the EU. No, we want you, but you have to fulfill the conditions. So yeah, I don't think anybody will say it openly. What is common knowledge that, I mean, Turkey probably won't become a member of the EU that's becoming much more integrated, but it might become part of a Eurosphere, much more integrated, or at least maybe even that is too ambitious. Let's say Turkey will align with the EU on many issues that really matter on day to day. I mean, if you're Turkish and you have the same rights as a Georgian or Ukrainian, you just get on the plane from Istanbul, they're all the low-cost carriers, and you go to Munich or Dublin and spend the weekend there and go back. That will be a big deal for Turkey. And it's not now possible. If you're a Turkish company offering services and you benefit from markets opening in Germany, and the list goes on. So you don't, I mean, frankly, I mean, membership will be great, but it's not realistic. But short of membership, there's so much that can happen. But also it cannot happen right now because of the political atmosphere, the political conditions that sort of undermine the relationship.
Thank you. I don't know who was first. Go ahead.
Alan Duke's a former politician here. You said, I think, that you expect that if the opposition wins, it will not be a Liberal government because of the combinations that are there. What implication do you think that might have for relations with the EU? I mean, I was one of the optimistic people way back when Erdogan came on the scene, and he, as you said, he said all the right things at the beginning, and he gradually became more authoritarian. And then we had Sarkozy and the Germans who couldn't agree that bringing this big bloc into the EU would suit them, democratically. If a new government is not a Liberal government, do we not risk having the same combination of circumstances again? Bear in mind the fact that the EU already has a bad experience with countries that have become more autocratic. Look at Orban, look at Poland. They looked liberal at the beginning, but things changed differently. So how do you think that scenario would?
I'm a bit more optimistic than you. I mean, first of all, it won't be liberal in absolute terms, but it will be liberal in relative terms. Compared to the current government, it will make steps in the right direction if they free Selahattin Demirtas, which is very likely they'll do because they'll need support from the Kurdish party in parliament. They have to do something, and they might reform the anti-terror law to get visa-free. So without calling them liberal in the Platonic ideal type sense, they'll be liberal compared to Erdogan. Secondly, the stakes won't be as high, right? Nobody will be expecting the EU to offer membership or to recommit. I mean, the list of demands Turkey has put forward are much more tenable. So I don't think Germany or anybody else will actually mind if Turkey expands the customs union, given if they implement all the reforms that the EU demands them to. So with all smaller stakes, small steps, you can do stuff. And the price Turkey will pay is bearable. I mean, what will happen if you free Demirtas? It won't be the end of the world for anybody. Even for this nationalist outfit, the good party, they can live with it. So I'm fairly more upbeat of a situation. What I'm less hopeful about this coalition is, I mean, a friend of mine just today, we had this webinar, he drew this comparison to Israel after 2021, when you had the Rainbow Coalition toppling Netanyahu. But what those guys had in common was the hate of Netanyahu. So it was an anti-Netanyahu bloc. And the moment they seized power, they started fighting amongst each other. So something very similar might happen in a post-Erdogan Turkey, that the coalition will turn against one another, and the Kurdish issue might be the wedge that drives them apart. Economic policy, X number of things can go wrong. So I think because the bar with the EU is set so low, there's only one direction you can go up. But there is a real danger that the next government will shoot itself in the leg And ironically, there'll be people in the EU saying that, I mean, better to work with the devil, you know. Erdogan might be a nasty piece of work, but he's somebody who delivers. And in the presidential system, when he was in charge, they committed sort of on the refugee deal, and they delivered. And actually, we are better off with somebody to do business with. Funnily enough, I've heard that from Greek diplomats, saying that we have this territorial disputes, but we've had it for decades, and the previous regime as well. And who knows what happens under the next coalition? They'll be unpredictable. With Erdogan, you have a strong man in Ankara, you do business. And, he makes a step forward, we make a step forward. He flexes his muscles, Greece flexes muscles, and we come to an arrangement. I mean, this sort of thinking might come on the EU side if they become disillusioned with the next government. But again, this is a bridge too far. We don't know if they're going to win. There's a lot of momentum behind Erdogan as well, to be realistic, and he might just about pull it off this time.
James Holmes, the second year of politics, policy, and economics students here in Maynooth. I was just wondering, just for argument's sake, like if Turkey were to ever gain access to EU membership, would further expansion in the Western Balkans with the likes of Serbia and Bosnia, would that be further complicated? And vice versa, if they gain access first, would it complicate Turkey's accession?
Yeah, I think under also scenarios, those countries enter the EU first. They'll be before Turkey. But even their membership is a huge question mark. Because again, problems on both sides, it's supply and demand. And it's a subject of an entirely different talk, and I'm happy if John invites me, and I'll carefully provide it. Hopefully he'll be with us as well, asking tough questions. But yeah, I mean, these are smaller countries that are surrounded by the EU, they're digestible. You can very well envision Montenegro becoming a member towards the end of this decade. Turkey is a different ball game altogether. I mean, the promise and the rewards are greater, but also the risks. So yeah, I mean, an ideal world, Turkey will be joining after the Western Balkans. But in the world we live today, the likely scenario is that neither the Western Balkans nor Turkey will be joining, except for maybe one country in the Western Balkans.
It's one of us, the economics department, and I'm Turkish. Thank you for the talk. I wonder about 20, 30 years from now with EU's age demographics.
Yeah.
If they don't open the labor market to Turkey, where will they get all the labor?
Yeah, I wish I had the I wish I had the answer, but one kind of quick thought is that Turkey is also facing a demographic. Not the same time frame. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, eventually, probably there will be some sort of free movement arrangement, and again, you don't have to be theological about the EU. It's not membership versus non-membership. You can imagine lots of things in between and flexible arrangement. But to get there, you have to have political will on both sides, which is now obviously lacking. But yeah, I mean, I guess it won't be just Turkey, it will be other countries as well. I mean, Ukraine will be an obvious example. We have how many Ukrainians we have right now with temporary status. So what the EU did, actually right now, one of the consequences of the war is that if you look at free movement, Ukrainians have more rights than people from the Western Balkans because they have automatic access to the labor market. Yeah. If you're, for example, from Bosnia, you can go to say Germany, and the German government has a visa scheme, but you have to go through paperwork. through the motions. The access of Ukrainian, and I don't argue against it. I mean, there's a good reason why you provide shelter to people displaced by war. But my point is that there will be other countries in the neighborhoods. There'll be source of migrants, and also it won't be only, as you well know, it won't be only the usual suspects, the big industrialized member states experience shortage of labor. It also be the likes of Hungary, the Czech Republic, and so on and so forth. Those new, or not as new anymore, people in Central and Eastern Europe, they already experience shortage of labor. So there will be 20 years from now, those governments will also be thinking how to fill the gap.
Thank you very much. One more, and if there are no more, are there going to be any more questions here? One more there. So one more from online and one more here, and then we can conclude.
Sebele Kalamat, arguably the EU is a victim of its actor-driven, intergovernmental and strategic approach to Turkey. I wonder if there are any intermediary rewards for ordinary Turkish citizens similar to those of many Balkans and Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, we have to be realistic about what the EU can achieve and what Turkey can absorb. It's driven by national interests. It's intergovernmental in many respects. But I mean, that's almost a necessary outcome because we want a much more centralized EU foreign policy that is driven by Brussels institutions and based on principle and political values. But it's not achievable. Let's be realistic. And also, in this political situation we live right now, the EU can be very normative and tell Turkey, you have to reform, you have to build a democracy, only then you work with us. But this policy won't go anywhere because there will be no buyers on the Turkish side, and not just the AKP but others as well, because they've grown disillusioned. There's a commitment problem. Nobody, or at least very few people in Turkey will believe that if they implement 100% of EU demands, they'll receive anything. So if there's a trust problem on both ends, this normative relationship doesn't work anymore. So it's not only about the big member states trying to get what they want, but also the situation in Turkey itself and the experience in recent decades. What kind of quote unquote normal Turks, or shall I say people from Turkey, because I mean, those of you who know Turkish, you know, the term is laden, right? There's Turk, which is ethnic Turk, and there's something that liberals very much like Türkiye, a person from Turkey. So let's say Türkiye people who are ethnically whatever they are, but they are citizens of Turkey. So what did they get from the EU? I mean, there's quite a bit they can get. I mean, for instance, free travel, visa-free travel, what their neighbors are enjoying. I mean, if you can get on a boat and go through the neighboring Greek island really easily, or something of that sort. If you're middle class Turkish, or if you are working class, you go and apply for visa, for work permits. So that to be in look for employment in parts of the EU. You can get probably better environmental standards, cleaner energy by aligning with EU legislation. You can probably get better quality public policy making. I mean, there are a lot of benefits for Turks as well. But again, the problem is, I mean, first of all, the deterioration of relationship, the lack of trust, the negative legacy Erdogan will leave, because it's not about only his personality, but also hollowing out institutions in Turkey. countries governed by formal means and by personal loyalties. You could see it very well in the earthquake, where the basic emergency services were dysfunctional. I mean, the communication system broke down. So this is what is absent. And it's very difficult for EU and Turkey to recover that. That was happening 20 years ago, I think.
And the last question.
Oh, yeah, this is sort of moving toward the question of EU membership. Obviously, there's talk of this sort of alternative, right? The third sort of way, where it's sort of like an economic periphery, where maybe there's some economic rights, or it's not a full-on membership in the EU, and that's something that's a popular option as well in some candidate states, such as Serbia, for example, because these countries do not want to meet the normative demands of becoming a full democracy. So do you think if this rainbow coalition eventually succeeds in some way of stabilizing the domestic landscape in Turkey, do you think maybe there will be sort of joint talks of this third way of not complying to normative demands, but actually still getting best of both worlds, sort of getting the trade, getting access to the European market, because the European market as well needs it, but not complying to the normative demands of EU membership?
My answer is yes and no. There will be talks, but they'll be on policy by policy basis, sectoral basis, and they won't be framed as this big idea that we are building a new type of relationship. If the relationship happens, it will happen by default, not by design. It's a bit the same as post-Brexit, just to bring an example closer to Ireland, right? You have the Brussels Agreement, or whatever you call it, the future relationship agreement. And now with Sunak and future governments, the idea is to build upon it here and there, to improve and bring closer the relationship by stealth almost, because you don't want the tabloid media to report on it and to kind of raise hell. And we accommodated Brussels on whatever policies, vegetable standards, whatever. Something of the sort will happen in Turkey under the right circumstances. You have the customs union, you upgrade it, you have visa-free travel, you have green transition. You just put more and more layers upon it. And how you call it, I mean, you have a PhD student in 20 years' time, and they write their dissertation and they come up with a fancy label. The problem with going back to the old days, when we had the conservatives in Germany, but also Sarkozy and the rest, they call for, let's have privileged partnership, not membership. But it was an empty phrase. I mean, nobody knew what privileged partnership involved. It was just a way to say no in a nice way. Whereas actually, I think privileged partnership or something of the sort is possible. It's just a matter of finding the substance and trying to build it, and also to work out the arrangement, because I mean, it obviously involves concessions on EU as well, financial transfers, opening sectors of the economy. But this is the boring part of European politics that is probably more effective than arguing about, is Turkey Christian or compatible with democracy and the big existential questions, or how, is it membership or something else? Yeah, I mean, the more, if it will be a chaotic sign if you get into the nitty-gritty. And we have boring seminars with like 10 people around the table discussing the customs union, and the half of the room goes away. That will be a sign that things are going in the right direction with Turkey.
So are there any other questions? If not, I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and all the people online for coming, for attending, and the students who had to leave before 6 o'clock. I'd like to thank again Her Excellency Gergana Karadziova of the Bulgarian Embassy, the ambassador of Bulgaria here in Ireland, for coming. I'd like to thank John Brennan. I don't know John Brennan. I don't know if he's online listening to us, but he's ill. I very much hope that the third time you come to Ireland, he's not going to get COVID.
Third time lucky.
And I will definitely let him know and tell him that he should invite you again.
Okay.
Try it. If when you come, he's not going to get COVID. And of course, I would like to thank you so much for an incredibly informative and inspirational talk. And let's hope for good futures for Turkey and for Europe. Thank you very much.